Okay.
Well, good evening. Tonight, this is I think, our 13th or 14th webinar already with one of the pioneers of the three principles. Tonight, our guest is Catherine Casey. Catherine has a long experience with the principles. She's been conducting three principles programs to a wide range of people in many different environments throughout the world for the past 27 years. Notably, Catherine developed and implemented one of the first three principles programs in the Santa Clara County in California criminal justice system, which lasted over 15 years. That's impressive. Serving incarcerated adult men and women, thousands of inmates have been exposed to the teachings of Citibanks. Catherine also provided principles classes to inmates in the infamous San Quentin prison, even known here in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And most importantly, the Three Principles program was set up in Santa Clara County juvenile justice system. Catherine developed and implemented a resilience program for health care professionals in Santa Clara Valley Medical Center, San Jose, California, and one of the largest public hospitals in the United States. Many of the environments that Catherine has provided her consulting services include Fortune 500 corporations, Dow Chemical, British Aerospace Engineering Defense Systems, Clorox, Boston Scientific, medical centers, religious organizations, state and county organizations, adult and juvenile criminal systems, including San Quentin prison, educational systems, institutions, elementary through college, and psychiatric residence facilities addiction treatment programs. She also shared the principles to LGBT individuals and groups. Persons wanted to advance their consulting, coaching, and careers also seek her out for mentoring services. Catherine's passion and vision is to reignite the resiliency and the wisdom in all persons in any environment. And she's currently a proud grandma living in San Jose, California. Well, Kathy, very happy to have you here tonight. And we're very proud to have you as one of our speakers. Can you tell us a little bit about the program you did for people in prisons?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. When I first, I was getting my degree, a master's in clinical psychology. And so I had a part-time job to bring in money while I go to graduate school. So my part-time job was actually in the jail system. And there I was doing like a criminal justice study. So I was in charge of data collection, finding out what drugs are being used out on the streets. And then the National Institute of Justice would, in all the cities, look at trends. So I ran a research project in the jail, and I had a team of interviewers. And so during that time, I ended up learning the principles by accident. And as I learned the principles and I would go to that job, it was this part-time job in the jail, and I'd be sitting there when I was on the women's side of the jail. They would be using the phones, and they would be getting upset because they're upset about their kids and what's going on the home front. And, they were stressed out and upset. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, maybe this would be helpful to teach this to the inmates, because I'd been learning the principles for about 9 months. And while I was doing that job, and all of a sudden it occurred to me, well, maybe I could teach this in here. So a colleague and I, we wrote up a proposal through, the public county system here to get funded to actually set up a program for inmates in jail. We got funded, we got the money, and we kind of freaked out because I had never taught the principles before. And said, oh, great, now what do we do? And so with that, we just went in and started meeting with adult inmates, men and women. And like I said, teaching as best as I could. And over that time period, we were teaching thousands of inmates over the years. And then at one point, there were so many, my colleague and I, we said, we can't do this by ourselves. So we trained other trainers to come in and, so we broke it up into smaller groups. So we had a lot more people coming in. So that's how it started, me just sitting there doing something else in the system, in the jail system, and then kind of looking around going, well, this might be a good place to bring this bring the principals in. And then meanwhile, I would pass the juvenile justice system, juvenile hall. And I would always say, I want to get to the kids too, one day. And then one day a politician heard about this, got to listen to Sid. And she came up to me, she said, I have money. Where do you want it to go? And I said, I want to teach this to kids. She said, write it up and I'll fund you. So we got a program funded through that. And that's how it all started. By happenstance and never look back. So yeah, we did that for years. And then eventually got into San Quentin. Now we were locally here in Santa Clara County, which is south of San Francisco. We wanted to get the principals into all the state prisons in California. Yeah. So we wrote a couple of proposals and never got funded. We didn't even get a thanks but no thanks letter. I mean, they just were not interested. So we sort of gave up on it. We were still teaching locally. Well, one day, a year later, my colleague, she gets a phone call because she was in charge of our program here. She gets a phone call from the woman in charge of programs in San Quentin. And she said, there's an inmate here who keeps bugging me that we should have your program. And he had been in my class here locally. And she said, would you be interested in bringing your program into San Quentin? And we laughed. I said, it took an inmate to get us in to doing the program in San Quentin. And so that's how we got started in San Quentin. So, I mean, it's like a fairy tale how this all unfolded. And so we were in there for a couple of years teaching in San Quentin prison. We tried to get into other state prisons, and we were right on the verge of getting there. But there was so much violence in the state prison system, they shut down all programs. They kicked us all out, me and all the other programs throughout the whole state. They just shut down outside people coming in. And so that's how it ended, which was very sad. But that was quite an experience, to say the least.
Okay. Are there any 3P programs running still at prisons in the States?
Well, not that I know of. But here's what happened, though. It took on a life of its own because as the inmates learned this, they started to take this up themselves and share it with other inmates.
Okay.
Even in the secure housing units, they're called the SHU. And these are places where inmates are put in isolation. They're not, and it's a maximum
security.
Yeah. And it's where the bad guys go, right? And if a guy had heard about principals locally and they ended up on one of those, Sid let me make copies of The Missing Link, his book, The Missing Link. So I had copies, on paper. And they would take them back. Sometimes they come to the local area to deal with, issues of parenting and all, if they had custody of their kids or whatever. And they go back to the SHU, and they were literally rolling them up really tiny and sharing them with the other guys who were in isolation. And what I found out was if they got to use the law library, because each prison has a law and they have a right to use the law library. They'd smuggle all kinds of things, but they were smuggling Sydney Banks's Missing Link so that other prisons were getting copies of The Missing Link.
Oh, wow.
I mean, this is what was told to me. So even though we weren't there physically after the 15 years, it took a life of its own. It continued. And the inmates were supporting it now, which is the way it should be. So amazing story.
Wonderful.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many stories of what happened working with folks in the prison system. Just amazing.
And you told me earlier that you've been trained by Sid himself.
yeah.
Also, when was that? Was it when you just
Well, see,
started?
I came into this in 1995, and so I was teaching this in the jail, and I didn't even know who Sydney Banks was. I didn't even know who he was. I learned this from Roger Mills. He was brought into Santa Clara County. I sat in a training he did, and then I realized, oh, this is it. I mean, everything I'm learning in clinical psychology is going out the window, seriously, and this is the direction I want to go in. So I had been doing the work for close to a year, and one day I was listening to George Pransky talking about that Sydney Banks would be speaking in Hawaii. And I'm looking at, well, who is Sydney Banks? I'd never heard his name before.
Okay.
And I said to Roger, who, and he kind of shrugged his shoulders, and my colleague now meanwhile, the county put money on this. We had a budget where they funded our programs. I said,
Mhm.
who is this guy? Is he some weird guru kind of? I mean, I'm like, I was freaking out. Like, what if this is a flaky kind of thing? And we're now, this would not be good
Yeah.
because you don't put government money on flaky things. So my colleague and I said, well, we're flying to Hawaii to check the guy out. That seriously, we need to find out who he is. So we fly to Hawaii, and he was there to speak. And so it was at a hotel on Oahu.
Mhm.
And so at least 100 people were there. And I'm looking around like, okay, let's see what this is about. So they had a special chair with the Hawaiian flowers, and this Hawaiian woman came out and did a special blessing, and the cultural thing in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And he came out and he sat in the special chair, and I thought, oh, what have we done? What have we gotten ourselves? I mean, I was really, really, really worried. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, let's see what happens. So he asked the group, would somebody ask me a question that he likes to start? So somebody asked him, so he started speaking. He started speaking about the principles. And I'm listening. I thought, well, yeah, that's what we're teaching. Okay, this sounds okay. And at one point, a woman raises her hand. She said, now, Sid, I have this friend who has this physical issue. And she went into a long story about the physical issue, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden she said to Sid, so what would you tell her to do? And I thought, here we go. Here comes the woo-woo stuff, right? And he didn't respond right away. And the room was very quiet. And all of a sudden he looked up to her and he said, I think she should go see a doctor. And when I heard that, I said, okay, I think I'm cool with Sydney Banks, right? I think I'm good about it. So then he continued speaking, and I'm loving it, and I'm taking it in. So we have a break, and people surround him right away. They just want to surround him. And we were in like a lecture hall where it's kind of, where it's slanted, and you can only come in and out at the front. Well, he breaks from the group and he starts walking up the back. I'm thinking, oh, he thinks there's a door up here. And I was by myself standing there. I hadn't left where I was sitting. I was just standing in front of my seat, and I'm the only one. He's coming up. Well, he's coming up towards me. And I'm like, oh my God, he's coming up towards me. And he said, listen, I want you to come to Dunsmuir. And I looked at him, I'm like, okay. And he turned around, he went back down, and off he went. And when we broke for lunch, he broke from the group, and he found me, and he said, I said, okay. And I finally found Roger. I said, what is he wants me to come to Dunsmuir. What does that mean? He said, oh, I told him about your work in the jail. And this has been his biggest dream, is to have the principles taught in the jails. And he wants you to come because we're having a special group where we're bringing in banks and businesses and community people together to share about the principles. And I'm like, okay, so that's how I met Sydney Banks. That's
Wow.
how I met him. And from that point on, he was so supportive of the work I was doing, to the point where every time we got together to hear him speak, he would talk about the inmates and talk about my work. And we had a video of the inmates. So he'd show the video. And I'm like, Sid, people came to hear you speak, not to hear, And one day I invited him locally, and we got 165 inmates
Wow.
under the same roof with the correctional officers and the commander of the jail and the politician. And he walked in and he walked to the back of the room and he started walking out the door. And I'm chasing back, Sid, you can't go out there. You can't just wander around the prison. And he turned around, he had tears streaking down his face. And he said, all these people have been learning. I said, these are the ones they let us bring in. There are more, but because of their level of security, they can't be let out. He couldn't believe it. He could not. He was just, because he didn't realize how many. And so when he spoke, of course, the inmates got really impacted, but the correctional officers, the uniforms, they got impacted because they were just there to keep order. They were just there to make sure, everything was in order. And it was highly unusual to have women and men together in an environment. They just don't do that. So that's why they had the extra correctional officers. And they came up to me and thanked me for having them come and speak. And they were just totally impacted. So I'm telling you, and then I had brought all this camera equipment because I wanted to videotape it. So I went up, I said, Sid, so I wanted to videotape, you speaking to the inmates. And a lot of them signed releases that it was okay, and if they didn't want to be in it, we make sure we wouldn't film them. And he said, no, I don't want to impose. So no, I said, okay. So we didn't film it. When he was finished and as we're walking out, he looked at me and said, why didn't we film that? And I didn't know what to say. I just said, yeah, you're right. We should have filmed it. And I went up to somebody else. He said, oh, you never ask him ahead of time. No, you don't do that because he always changes. I said, well, I was trying to be respectful. And the other thing he did, he had just finished writing The Enlightened Gardener. And he and his wife, Judy, they brought a whole case of books to give to the inmates when they go in to speak. And I had to tell them, well, you can't give them the books because they're hardback. And hardback books, they can, cut them up and make them into weapons. And so I felt bad. Well, the night before they went in, before he spoke, they sat up and they cut the covers off all the books. And they brought the books without the covers. Can you believe that? That was pretty amazing. And I said, Judy, she said, yeah, it was an ordeal because they were, it's not easy to cut covers off of a book.
No, that's
but
true.
that they did because they wanted the inmates to have it. So, I mean, that's one of so many stories. And we were getting ready to bring him into San Quentin because they do allow speakers or religious ministers on Sunday to speak to the whole prison, when they all come to the religious services. And I was getting him cleared for that security clearance. And that's when he ended up getting his first illness, which was colon cancer. So we had to cancel because he was ill. So we never, and I was so excited that he would speak to the whole prison. But because of his illness, he wasn't able to do it. So, but yeah, it was pretty amazing. It was pretty amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's your experience with Sid.
Yeah.
Can you tell me why the services have stopped after that, after about 15 years? Can you tell me why?
Politics. You know how in a country like in the United States, when a new president comes in, everybody who worked for the previous president, they're gone.
Yeah.
And when the new president comes in, they bring in their people. Well, the same thing happened. The guy who was in charge of this department in the county, Robert Garner, he brought the principals in to the county, and he's the one who got it funded, and he's the one who supported it. He actually had a department called three principal services department. I mean, so it was a concrete funded department in Santa Clara County. Well, when the new guy came in, he saw it as snake oil. He thought it was, he over the years, he thought it was ridiculous. And that's what you run into, when you go
Yeah.
against traditional, they look at us and they think, yeah, the new agey, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though we got the highest ratings and they never interviewed the actual clients receiving it. To make a long story short, so as soon as the new guy came on board, and I remember I was in London doing a training, and my colleague Mark Howard, he sends me a text. They just defunded all of the programs. Like, they're gone with the stroke of a pen. Over. Yeah. And the same thing happened. George Pransky had brought this into this huge defense company, which I got to be a part of.
Mhm.
And when the new CEO came on board, she had the same thinking.
Yeah.
And they had been in there a good probably 12 years, transformed the whole organization, and with the stroke of the pen, canceled
Yeah.
the entire program. So George and I are commiserating with each other, like all the work that we went through and over the years, how it had really taken hold. And then because of politics, that's all it took. And then it's over.
Yeah.
It's amazing how that happens. But I didn't lose hope, because to this day, when I'm shopping somewhere in San Jose, inevitably somebody will, Kathy, remember me? Oh, after I learned the principles, I stopped using drugs. I mean, or this young man, I was at an arts festival, and he came, he said, Kathy, look, I'm still out, and look at this is my wife and my new baby. And so I'm constantly running into another guy. Was standing in line at Target. I don't know if you have Target, but it's a big box store.
I know. Yeah.
And the guy who's checking me out, he says, Kathy, it's me. And I'm like, wow, this is great. He said, Target hires ex-inmates, ex-offenders. And I got a job and I'm going to college now. And I'm like, whoa. So no matter where I go, I hear these wonderful stories. And because we thousands of inmates got to hear these principles. So you just don't know how that will take hold. And to this day, every now and then, something like that will happen. So even though it formally ended, I know there's still a few people in the juvenile justice system that came in through the actual department. They kept it going. But as far as and then the main jail, we did get back in. We did get back in, but again, because two officers had murdered an inmate who had mental health issues, and they shut down the whole system again. No outsiders. It was always something like that. So we finally got back in, and then they kicked us out again because of the circumstances.
Yeah. It's a shame.
But it was quite an experience. Quite an experience.
Dear Hank and dear Nicole, please ask questions too if they
Yeah.
with you, because that's the way Kathy loves to see it.
Yeah, I love to hear what you are interested in.
Well, if I'm given the opportunity, then
Go for it. Yeah.
So first of all, really nice to meet you, Kathy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how do you pronounce your name? How do you pronounce your name?
It's Hank, just like
Hank.
regular, and Kalk means chef. So
Yeah. Well, I always think of Hank Williams, famous singer, Hank.
Yeah, we know him.
Yeah.
That'll work. That'll
Hank,
work.
that's a good manly name, Hank. Anyway.
Yeah, no complaints.
Anyway.
Yeah. My personal interest in the principles, to bring down the scope a little bit, is evolving into less in what they do, and more in what they are, as in the nature of the principles, which is So it's really interesting to look at what they do, and I'll keep an interest in that probably for forever. But as in what they are is very. I'm still learning what that is and what it does and what that entails, and to even conceive it. I haven't really formed a question on this one, but I was wondering, in your exploration of your like learning about the principles and how you talk about it and how you bring it to other people. Is this something you've run into, or any thoughts come to mind regarding the nature of the principles
Mhm.
themselves? Could you speak to that? And I'd be open to hearing
Mhm.
anything that comes to mind.
Yeah. Well, as far as I'm concerned, no matter which environment, who I'm speaking to, who I'm teaching, as you saw when my bio, I've been in so many different environments, from inmates to corporate people and everything in between. And what makes that possible is because of the nature of the principles. It meaning the principles are a foundation of everything. It literally explains the existence of life. That to me is in a nutshell. And people know this intuitively, that there's something that allows us to be alive. I mean, we don't think about that all the time, but I remember growing up, and I grew up on the East Coast in Boston, and I remember in the summertime, I'd have the window wide open, and I would look up at the sky and see the stars and think, wow, how does that happen? Like what is that these stars are up there? And now when you hear what they're really seeing with these amazing telescopes and whatever, how beyond and beyond and beyond. And so to me, it's just the nature of the principles is just that. It's this energy source. It's what is behind all of life that allows us to be here and to just exist. So I come with that knowing when I walk into any situation. And what I want people to understand is not how to be a better person, or how, or for inmates to stay out of jail, or for kids to not be in trouble, or what. I'm not there for that, which is the opposite of what I was trained for. So I was trained to give them tools to get it together. Now I'm just there to show them what I just described. Guess what you've got? Guess what's behind you? Guess what you're connected to? And you use language that resonates for them. Like with inmates, I would use their world to describe the nature of it. And it rings true, because one day I looked at this group of inmates, and they had been with me for a number of weeks, and they were catching on. They were like, whoa. And it was new, something like, why haven't I heard this before? And if I had heard this before, I wouldn't be here. I mean, they were really seeing something. And I said, how many of you are there times when you actually forget that you're locked up? And I couldn't believe I asked that. It just sort of came like, and they looked at me like, Kathy, what are you, crazy? Why would you ask us a question like that? I said, well, I'm going to stay with it. Are there times when you actually forget that you're locked up? And they all got really kind of quiet. And this one guy goes, you know what? There are times I forget that I'm locked up. And then he described it. And I said, so how does that happen? See, that now I'm pointing them to the nature of thought working through them, that when their mind is free and clear, they could be anywhere. It doesn't matter where they are. It doesn't matter where they are. And then when their minds aren't free and clear, and they have this thought in their head, I'm locked up, you will experience being locked up. And then we talk about psychological freedom, the difference between physical freedom. And now we're really looking at the nature of our existence. And one inmate who I watched him go through trial, he was part of a gang, and one of the gang members killed another human being. So he was up for murder. In California, if you're just part of the group, you get charged as if you did it yourself. So, and he's a young guy, college student. It was heart-wrenching. And as he learned the principles, he realized, I shouldn't have been with that group. So I get it. And then he said, you know what? I'm probably freer than most people walking out on the street. And this is when he found out he got life without parole. and he's chained to the wall. He has ankle chains on, and we got to interview him on film before they took him away. They allowed me, and he shared how he has this freedom inside of him. He said, I wouldn't choose to be locked up, but I know my life is not over, and I know I'm going to have a full life. Now, how do you explain that? See, so to me, as people get a sense of what I'm talking about here, it helps them go beyond just the limits that we create in our own mind. That, yeah, the nature of how these principles work, and you can call them A, B, C, and D. You can call them, black, white, and purple. I mean, we're putting words on something that is intangible and invisible, but yet it's what allows us to be here right now having this conversation. And so I always try to, so I may start where, like, kids in juvenile hall, I would ask them, well, what do you guys want to talk about? And they say, well, we want to talk about drugs. And I'm like, okay, let's pick 3 topics. I write drugs on the whiteboard. All right, let's 2 more topics. Sex. We want to talk about sex. I write, these are boys. Sex. Okay. All right, we got 1 more to go. Gangs. I said, okay, so we have drugs, sex, and gangs. Which one should we do first? And they go, sex. We want, and they're thinking, I'm going to get upset or whatever. I go, okay, let's pull out sex. How many of you guys have girlfriends? Oh yeah. And they're all, oh yeah, I have a girlfriend. I said, how many of you like to fall in love? Like, how many of you have fallen? Oh yeah. And you could hear them. Yeah. And they make these crazy noises. Oh yeah, it's cool when you fall in love, and they're just going on and on. And then I asked them, I said, now, does that change? So you fall in love and you're this great love feeling, but does that sometimes change and it's not that same feeling anymore? And they go, yeah, that's a drag. And they start talking about how, yeah, when they don't have that feeling. And then I'll look at them, I'll say, now, why do you think that happens? Because it's the same girlfriend. So what happened? Did she change? And I said, now really, did she really change? Now I really want you to be truthful. And they're like, well, not really. I said, well, what do you think happened? Where did that loving feeling go? And they're looking at me, well, we don't know. And now they're open to hearing, well, would you be interested in knowing why that happens? Yeah. And then I talk about how that feeling is natural. It's in them. But then when their minds get all this thinking about the other person, it's still there, but you're burying. I drawing and stuff. And they go, wow, nobody ever told us that, and boom, they get it. They get it very quickly. The young ones, it hits them. But again, I talk about the nature of these principles in the context of their world, what's relevant to them, so that they can hear it. I wouldn't do the same thing in the business world. That would be a different context. But I'm still pointing to the same place, regardless of who the person is. So I'm always speaking about in fact, that's where you want to be with no matter who if you want to point people to the principles, it's kind of back here. But it's Sydney Banks used to say, go where people live, go, meet people where they are, and then take them back to the principles. And that's how I do it. That's how I do it. And there's no one way to do that. I have a training program where I take people through getting deeper for ourselves. And then, okay, now I see this more for myself. How do I connect that with folks out here? How do I teach that? Or how do I explore that with other folks? And I've been so lucky because I had amazing mentors, starting with Sydney Banks. And I just got myself thrown in there. I mean, I just jumped in with what little I knew. But the only thing that I think made a difference for me is that I had that certainty in the nature of these principles. See, when you go in with that certainty and you see people you have the set of eyes that they have this limitless connection, as much as I do, and as much as the stars have it and the planets have it, I have it. This is the life force. When you have that vision for people, they feel that from you. They feel it. And how you get them to realize it, it is, you know, again, there's no one way. It's like using your own creativity to get that going. Because I didn't even know how to teach these boys until I realized, okay, I don't even know what they're into. I mean, I have not a clue. And the funny thing about what I just shared, when I did that first class and we put the 3 things on the whiteboard, there was a probation office. They have somebody in the class all the time. And there were about 28 boys. And when we finished the class and they were really into it, was really a great class. And I thought, wow, I was totally amazed for a first class. It was pretty good. And the woman comes up to me and she said, listen, I need to talk to you. And I said, oh, okay. She said, well, I need to let you know you broke a number of rules. I said, what do you mean? Well, they're not allowed to talk about drugs. They're not allowed to talk about sex. And they're certainly not allowed to talk about gangs. And I said, oh, okay. And I'm thinking I'm going to get the boot, like they're going to kick me out. And she said, but I'm going to tell you something. I've been working for about 10 years. I've never seen a group this engaged ever. With all the programs we have, I have never seen anything like this. So I'm going to make sure I'm the one that's in here, because if there was somebody else, you would have been kicked out. I wouldn't have been able to even go to the first. And so I looked at her, I said, well, thank you. And I was like so grateful. She ended up going to our trainings and she ended up learning the principles. And then when she retired from being a probation officer, she was in charge of programs for men, anger management stuff that they make them go through when they've battered their wives. She was in charge of that program, and she based the program on principles, and the rest is history. But yeah, I was lucky because the 3 topics they wanted to talk about, that's not allowed. Dodged that bullet big time. But isn't that sad? And the thinking was, if they talk about drugs or they talk about gangs, it's going to make them keep doing it. See, they have this old way of looking at it. And, you know, so or in colors. See, gangs have colors, so they're not allowed to have any colors. So you know what they would do? They would get it if there was a pen with like a red color or a blue color, because it was blue for the norteños, red for this one. They would somehow mark the inside of a seam in one of, I mean, they would find a way to have their color. Mm-hmm. It made them go underground. The more they managed them, they just went underground. But they didn't see that wasn't really making a difference. So a lot of fun. I'll tell you one more story like that about colors. When we were teaching the adult inmates, one of my other colleagues, who I don't know if you've listened to her. Her name's Miss Beverly, African-American woman. Oh, I'll try to get a tape to you. You need to listen to her. Oh, anyway, she and I were teaching in the jails together. And she did this lesson on every human being has innate well-being. Mm-hmm. And she drew like an outline of a human being on the whiteboard. And she drew this big blue dot in the middle of the heart. And which represented everybody's innate well-being. And she's saying, everybody has a blue dot. You know, everybody, no matter what, even if you're locked up in prison, nobody ever loses. So she did a whole thing on the blue dot. Well, after our class, they have an art class, you know, because there's a special program in the prison. And so they all go to art class. And apparently the art teacher, you know, when they do their art, she puts them all along the walls in this huge kind of stadium. She likes to put it up there. So she puts all the artwork up, and every piece of artwork had a blue dot in it somewhere. And of course the art, and they're amazing artists locked up. I'll tell you, they're amazing artists locked up. So anyway, apparently when the correctional officers came in and saw the artwork and they saw the blue dot, in their mind, it was a gang sign. So they locked down they locked them down, sent them back to their bunks, and they were not allowed to do anything for a whole week. So we come in the next week and they said, no class. I said, what happened? Well, they're in lockdown. Oh, well, did they have a fight? Usually if they have a fight or something. No, they're doing gang stuff. I said, really? They're doing gang? How are they doing gang stuff? Oh, they had this blue thing going on in everybody, they put their colors in all their artwork. And I said, oh, which color were they using? Because we hadn't seen the artwork. Because they took it down. Oh, yeah, they were using this blue dot thing. And oh my God, we looked at each other. We said, officer, actually, that's not a gang sign. That's their innate well-being. And he looks at me, what are you talking about? I said, well, we use the blue dot to symbolize that they have innate well-being. And we just use that as a metaphor. And he said, you couldn't use yellow? You had to use blue? And it's funny because I should have known better, because with kids, I would know that. But for adults, it didn't dawn on me. I had to worry about that, right? And he said, do you know what a hassle this has been? And they're all pissed off. And I guess they were trying to explain it to him, and they didn't want to hear it. No, you're just, that's it. So have to look out what you do when you use your metaphors. And it's funny, when they finally came back the next week and we started the class and we explained to them why the correctional officers, blah, blah, blah. And they were still angry. They were still angry. And so I said, okay, let's get your, let's make a list of all your complaints. So we did. And when we finished, I said, okay, now what is it is there some way you can see this idea of separate realities, that they innocently truly thought you were doing gang colors, even though you weren't? But could you possibly consider that it wasn't, that they really did believe that? And but if I hadn't let them complain, I couldn't have asked that question.
Mm.
So I knew to let them get it out. And then could you consider, and we realized we probably should have used a yellow dot, but we also didn't consider. And it was an amazing class where we could understand this idea of separate realities, or seeing the innocence in somebody who's done you wrong, but had they known better or had an understanding, they wouldn't have done that. They wouldn't think to be curious. All right, you guys, what's the deal with the blue dot? They didn't even bother to ask. And the art teacher didn't know. She didn't know what it was, but they didn't bother to just ask them. Now, if they would have said, oh, those are our colors. Well, yeah, okay, you're in lockdown. That's wrong. See, I'm cool with that. But, oh, well, that's our innate well-being, and that's what we're doing to learn. Then the officer would hopefully see, oh, well, maybe we need to use a different color then, because, blah, 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 whatever. But if you don't have an ability to understand another person's viewpoint, then there's always that division, which is going on now in the world. Same things. It just expands into all the horrible things going on right now in the world. So this, again, lessons learned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lesson learned. And I could tell you a million more stories. Anything else?
Yeah, it's so important that we understand that we have separate realities.
Oh, yeah.
I had this conversation this morning with one of my clients, and he's in a difficult place with his partner. And as he is, a little bit depressed. So what I generally say, well, when you're depressed, you're trying to live in the past. And when you're anxious, you try to live in the future. And neither place is right for you. The only place where you can do anything is the now.
Yeah.
So, and he never realized that they were really living in different places, and that created their separate reality.
That's right.
And it's so important that you start to understand that we all live in different realities.
Absolutely.
because that's where all the uneasiness and misunderstandings come from, and that's also what happens in the world at large.
Well,
And
see, people don't see people. What I love about the principles, when I was 45 years old, I knew I thought, I thought about stuff. We all know we think, but I didn't see thinking as like, this is like you're creating your life with thought. I didn't see that. See, most people don't see that. Most people don't realize that they're living in a world of thought, and whatever that is. So if a person's in a ton of thought and it's heavy, they're going to be depressed, or they're going to be anxious, or they're going to it doesn't even matter what the thoughts are. It's just a lot. And when people, so one time I had a group of professional people come in for a training, and man, when I see people, I see the people, but I also see a wall of thought on top of them. It's like a visual thing for me. And they're coming in, and you could just feel there's a wall. And these are successful people. And right away, I think they have not a clue that they're in that. They literally have not a clue. That, to me, if people could wake up to just knowing that, would be a big deal. So you're pointing this out to this gentleman, like if you're in the future, or if you're in the past, that's just something you're creating in your mind. And if you wake up to that, even if you're in it, sometimes we're in it, we can't make ourselves get out of it. But if at least you know what it is,
absolutely,
that makes a difference.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not present and I feel bad right now, but I know, thank goodness, presence is still in me, even though I'm not there now. See, people can be neutral about their experience with understanding versus, freaking out. But this group of professional people, I said to them, how many of you right now, while you're sitting here listening to me, have at least 10 to 20 things on your mind, like right now? And they looked at me, and I said, and I will not take it personally. And they go, I said, no, truly, huh? And they raised their hands. They raised their hands. And I said, how many times do you feel that like you're in your weekend? So you wake up Sunday. When was the last time you were actually in your Sunday? And they go, what do you, well, you're in your Sunday, but your mind is, like you were saying, in the next week. And they go, yeah. See, I just want them to start to realize that they're in thought. Like, how many of you feel differently on Monday versus a Friday? How many of you are in a good mood on Fridays and not such a good mood on Mondays? And they're like, and they go, well, yeah, that's true. Well, why are days different? Why is the calendar different? They're all just days. What makes them different? So it helps people start to appreciate what you're pointing to your client, that there's this thing going on that they have not a clue that's happening. It's totally invisible to them.
Yeah.
Same in the corporate world. People who are managing people, they try to get them to change, or they give them, things to do, but they don't see this intangible piece. If people are walking around in a heavy state of mind, they're going to make mistakes. They're not going to be motivated. And if you're not talking about that, then it's like throwing sand into the ocean. It's just never going to end. But if you look at the intangible piece and you talk about the nature of that intangible piece, it just totally changes everything. But nobody looks at that. I didn't, and I'm getting a master's degree in clinical psychology. And we talked about thought, but we talked about managing thought, or reframing thought, or you have good thoughts, you have bad, we did all this stuff about the content of thought. Nobody ever talked about just the function of thought or the power of thought. It was all the other stuff, what to do with thought. And not to say that isn't helpful, that can be helpful. But then the person has to keep, coming up, okay, well, what about this issue now? What about this issue? But if somebody understands where all the stuff comes from, then your job is done. You're just pointing them to how the system works.
It's not about the content, it's about the fact that
No.
that's you, I think.
Yeah. And sometimes they need to talk about the content, so you let them talk about the content, but at some point you want them. In fact, I had this woman, she used to call, we'd have sessions and she would complain about her husband every session. And I had to clear my mind like 80 times. He was the husband from hell. Horrible. Seeing prostitutes, gambling money that belonged to the family. I mean, he was terrible.
That's
And
bad.
I'm thinking, honey, get the best lawyer in town and divorce him and take him for everything. I mean, that's where I'm coming from.
Mhm.
But she was in a religious community and divorce was not an option. And I'm like, so I'm listening to her over and over again, telling me how bad her husband was. And finally, after about the 6th session, she needed to, because she never told anybody all this crazy stuff. And at one point I said, okay, now here's the deal. Would you like to spend most of your time on him, or would you like to spend time on you? You know, I just put it to her. She said, yeah, I don't want to waste my time on him. I said, well, how about you and I, let's get you as connected as you can be, as grounded as you can be, so that you can navigate the crazy husband. How would you? So after that, we didn't talk about the husband anymore. We talked about her and her life and what she's connected to. And it was just, but I had to learn so much because I had all this thinking about, you know, him and it's wrong and this and that. And I had to get out of that to be able to support her in learning these principles to get her grounded. And if a guy can be locked up and feel free, she can be in a crazy marriage and feel free. See, it's the same thing. And so there's so many opportunities where we get to help people see that.
Mm.
But yeah, it's so sometimes my clients become my teachers.
Yeah, very often.
They're teaching me.
Yeah.
Because I'm serious. I'm like, oh, honey, what? And one day I did ask her. I said, well, I'm just curious, why wouldn't you get a divorce? Because I knew in her religious community, she said, well, this is what happens to women who get a divorce in my community. She listed all the things, and I thought, yeah, that's a lot. That would be a lot. And she said, you know, I'm not sure I'm equipped to do that.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that's okay. I just wanted to know because I really didn't understand. But here's the funny part about this. It's not funny, but you're not going to believe the end to this story. About a year later, I get a call from a colleague who knew this couple. The husband was driving really fast and he took an exit off a highway and he didn't stop and the car just flew off the highway and he was killed instantly.
Oh my God.
So
she
calls me and she's going through this religious thing where, you know, the community comes and she said, I have to pretend that I'm grieving, but I feel so free right now.
Yeah,
I feel so free. God has taken care of me.
Mm.
But she said, but I have to show you're the only one I can tell this. And I'm sitting there like, how should I be with this? You know, like I have somebody who's happy that the husband died.
Yeah.
Okay, because now I can be free. I'm like, okay, all right. I had to call a colleague, like, help me, you know, am I okay with this? You know, but it's funny how she did, before that happened, she did get very grounded. She really did. I mean, she didn't need for him to die, but him dying allowed her to go forward in her life in a way that she really wanted to and stay within her community.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. But
I once had a Jehovah's Witness who.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. Same thing. Yeah.
Same thing.
Very rigid. Yeah. Very rigid.
And she, in the end, found the power to divorce her husband.
Fabulous. Yeah.
And I've been with her through the whole process, and it's so amazing when that happens. And now she's got a new friend she's living with, and the kids have accepted it, and it's wonderful. But what happens if you do that in those types of communities? You get kicked out, really kicked out.
Oh no, that is true. Yeah.
You're socially wiped out completely.
I get that. Yeah.
And I remember very well her distraught
Yeah.
that social, how should I put it? Um, well, ousting out more or less what they did. Um, but she found so much power. She was such a powerful woman.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And, you know, it's, again, you know, you could look back at, you know, if you're Christian, you could look back at Christ. And it's funny because when I was traveling in Rome
Mm-hmm.
and I saw St. Peter's and all the churches and I was raised Catholic and I left, you know, as soon as I went, I just walked away. And the guy I was with, he was into the churches. He was Greek Orthodox. He was totally into it. I said, you know, if Christ came back today, he would look around and he would say, you know, this is not what I had in mind. This was not what I was pointing to.
No.
And my friend, he said, I know, but people are doing this in honor of him. I said, he wouldn't want that.
No.
See, he would want help the poor, you know, take care of each other, you know, whatever. He would not want this, even if it honored him. See, and he looked at me, he had a hard time hearing that from me. I said, truly, knowing who Christ was, he would not want this.
Yeah.
Or Buddha or anybody else. So, but unfortunately, people get these ideas about what it means to become a good person.
Yeah.
When they don't realize that's in us. We're all born as good people to begin with, and that's still there no matter what.
Yeah, that's true, and it's so encased into our culture because we in Europe or most of the Christians too.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, what I noticed, I've trained an Orthodox Christian in the past, and beginning we had a conversation just to see if we could match and match. And the funny thing is, we had such wonderful conversations, and at some stage, I found a text which Jesus should have said or might have said, and it said something like, "Heaven or hell are no places.
That's right.
Heaven and hell are in your heart."
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Sydney Banks said that.
Is that so? Okay.
Oh yeah. There's no. Yeah. Oh, he said that. Heaven or hell is not a place.
Yeah.
It's a state of being.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that, and metaphors are used, but people latch on to the metaphor. They don't look at what's behind the metaphor.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But right now, the world needs this idea of separate realities and understanding, and that's the only thing that's going to bring peace to the world. And if I sit there and I watch all this, and I think, oh, I want to jump in, you know.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Where I want to jump in, but then I realize the more at peace I can be, and not get caught up in that, and just be witness to it, and see it. You're not blaming, but seeing this is just levels of consciousness playing out, which are horrible. That's going to have more impact. And, you know, that's how I saw when I worked with inmates. If they were in a red shirt, that meant they killed another human being. And I told them straight out as we got to know each other, because they said, you guys are different with us. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, people come in like this, like, well, we're here and you're there. And we know they're trying with good intentions, but you can still see that but you guys are here. And I said, oh yeah. I said, no, I don't agree with what you did, but I'm looking beyond you, the person, or what you've done. I'm looking beyond that. I'm looking to that other part of you. And they can tell the difference with that. They can truly feel the difference with that. And would finally, some of them would take even responsibility. And even say, I thought I needed to do what I did to survive, or I thought whatever the issue was. And they didn't when they start hearing the nature of these principles, they're like, why have I not heard this before? like I felt when I heard. I said, why haven't I heard this before?
Yeah, that's.
I was the same way.
Yeah, it's the same for
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
I've been a coach for 25 years, and
Yeah.
only the past 5 years I heard about this.
Yeah.
I said, my God, this would have
Well,
changed.
Sid said this is at the core of all religions. See, it's
Mhm.
at the core of all the religions. But, you know, it doesn't matter what it's presented different ways because of the culture,
Mhm.
but the essence is always this intangible, limitless, whatever you want to call it. And if, you know, go deeper into your religion is what he would say. Go
Mhm.
deeper. Because the deeper you go, the more you don't feel separate.
Yeah.
But some religions, they go the opposite. The more attached you get to belief systems that are man-made,
Mhm.
the more separate we become.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the human condition right there. But anyway, we're really out there now, huh? It's Hank's fault. He started talking. What about the nature?
Yeah, good. Great question.
Yeah.
Thank you,
I
Hank.
hope this is helpful. I hope this is helpful.
It's wonderful. And it's already time again. We've already passed the hour. It's
See,
wonderful.
that's another, the nature of the principles is we have a feeling of timelessness.
Yeah.
You know, time, you have no sense of time. And I have that all the time where I like, oh, is it over already? You know, because,
Yeah.
you know, we're just hanging out, having a conversation.
Isn't that wonderful?
But thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
wonderful to have you.
Yeah.
And it's
And
wonderful.
I will let you know about that event.
Yes, please do.
It's going to be, oh, when do they say? Is it going to be in May? I mean, in December. No, it's not. Let me see. It's a weird. No. Yeah, I forget what it's going to be in December sometimes.
Mm. Is it under the organization of the 3PGC?
Yes. Are
Oh,
you on their mailing list?
I'm on the mailing list. I should.
They should be. Yeah, you should read it. They would definitely be announcing it through there.
Okay, wonderful. I'll find
Yeah,
it.
but it's I forget. It's sometime in December. They had a pre-meeting this morning to kind of talk about how it's going to play out. And then the people will just join the actual event. So, well, thank you.
Thank you again for
Yeah.
being here and spending your time with us.
Yeah.
And it's been an amazing
Yeah,
session.
great
Thank you very
meeting and
much.
talking with you. All right, you guys, take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Goodbye.